Hello. This video will take you through the Common Agricultural Policy. We're basically just going to finish off the lesson from last week that we didn't finish, which was about agriculture in Germany between 1933 and 1990. So, moving on, there is the section of the mind map. So if you can have the mind map in front of you as you were doing the lessons, and as you play the video, obviously pause as you see fit, and then complete the mind mapping as you play the video. Right, so let's start off first of all by looking at the reasons why the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, was introduced in 1962. It goes back to 1957. Okay, so in 1957, the EEC was created, the European Economic Community was created, and of course, West Germany joined, having originally joined the ECSC that was formed earlier in the 1950s. And of course, at that particular time when Germany joined, her agriculture was in decline, and as with many other European nations, Germany, to protect her declining agriculture, had put protective tariffs around her frontiers. This is West Germany. And of course, what happens with protective tariffs is it prevents cheaper agricultural goods coming into the German market from abroad, because if, let's say, the French or the British or the Polish want to sell their food to the German people, they've got to pay taxes to bring their food into West Germany, and it therefore makes their goods more expensive. So, therefore, by definition, it protects German agriculture from competition from abroad. However, conversely, it means that it's going to be very difficult then for Germany to export her food to other countries, because the other countries likewise will impose protective tariffs around their own frontiers. So what this basically means is that the prospects of trade between European nations in agricultural goods declines. So that was clearly, therefore, contrary to the spirit of the common market, because when the common market was created in 1957, the intention was to create a free trade area for all goods, industrial goods and agricultural goods. So what you've got in 1957, therefore, is each member nation basically managing its agriculture in its own way behind protective tariffs. So agriculture is managed differently, and that obviously had therefore an impact on free trade and on competition. So the feeling was that the creation of a common agricultural policy was critical if the EEC was to succeed. But it took a long time to negotiate that. Now, before we move on to the next slide, just have a look over here. There's information about Europe's common agricultural policy. So as you can see, 77% of the EU territory was rural, with 12 million full-time farmers. There's a couple of links there. I put the URLs in for you. The first one is an official explanation of how CAP works. Okay, so definitely worth. It's only 2.5 minutes. it's the official European Commission video that explains CAP. So obviously it's highly biased, selling all its advantages, but certainly worth playing to get a deepen your understanding about its purpose. And the second one is slightly longer, it's only 7 minutes, a bit more objective, not quite so professionally produced, but it does look at the original aims, but it also looks at its weaknesses and how CAP has changed in the last 20 years or so. So that's useful information for you. Okay, so we'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, so what do you need to be able to say about CAP? It's based on 3 principles. A, free circulation of agricultural goods. So we've established that one. So no protective tariffs around countries, free circulation of goods. So food in one nation can be sold freely, move freely, without having to pay taxes at frontiers across member states of the European Union. Secondly, common prices on agricultural goods. Okay, so establish a set price for each type of food across the nations, across the whole of the European Union. Again, that goes hand in hand with the free circulation of agricultural goods. The reason that there had been variation in prices was because of the protective tariffs. So, therefore, as a result of the protective tariffs, which was contrary to the spirit of the European Union, protective tariffs meant that food in one nation was more expensive than food in another nation, and therefore it became very difficult for one nation to sell their food to another nation, and therefore there wasn't equal distribution of goods, food, and therefore ordinary people were not getting access to food in the same way depending on which country you lived in. And thirdly, to maintain stable exchange rates, so that an agreement of the countries to work together to control the exchange rate mechanism, again, to protect the consumer against fluctuations in the price of food. So, benefits for German agriculture. Did it benefit? Okay, obviously bear in mind the fact that German agriculture was in decline, had always been in decline ever since Germany was created in 1871. If you were a West German farmer, what was the impact for you? Okay, so from 1962 to 1970, the CAP then established common prices. As we said, common prices there, okay, on a range of agricultural products. It had the immediate impact, therefore, in the short term, of dropping food prices in West Germany. Okay, so West German food had been historically very expensive because of the protective tariffs, resulted in a drop in the food prices. So the immediate impact, which was a benefit for German agriculture, is it made West German food much more exportable. So West German agricultural exports increased, especially milk, sugar and butter, because those tariffs disappeared. As a result, German farmers were able to export. So an example there, 1971 to 1977, West Germany's share of sugar exports within the EEC rose by 19%. Okay, particularly in the exam when you're writing about the Brett study question, where you're writing about the economy, it is useful. I think it's necessary to include statistical evidence. Okay. Again, I've put in another URL for you from a history of the CAP. Wealth of useful information there. Just type in that URL and useful website. Again, just which has got the history of, as you can see there, the history of the Common Agricultural Policy. in their overview section. That's the website from the European Commission, so pick up that link. Okay, so next strand, the impact of CAP, and as you can see, two strands from that, cost and inefficiency. So continue your mind mapping from this information. So the negative impact of the CAP on the West German economy. We just talked about the benefits, and there were significant benefits for German farmers, but the West German economy as a whole, not the benefits of for the individual farmers, was overall negative. That's a key point for you to put across, because the overall impact is it distorted West Germany's economic sector. Member states had to contribute to a fund. All member states had to contribute to a fund in CAP, and that fund was used by the European Union and by its bureaucracy to subsidise the modernisation of agriculture of member states. And that fund amounted to a huge proportion of the overall EEC budget. Now, the point is that given the fact that Germany's agricultural sector was very small in proportion to her whole economy, because, of course, West Germany was a highly industrialised nation. The vast proportion of her gross national product came from industry, not from food. The contribution that she had to make to that fund, which was used by the EEC to subsidise agriculture, outweighed the benefits, to West Germany. So therefore, that the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, economically proved to be inefficient. The disadvantages by far outweighed any advantages. The CAP was an advantage if you were a German farmer, because there were significant benefits for you. We'll come on to that in a second. But for the West German economy as a whole, it was overall economically efficient. So, for example, at times West Germany was spending 30% of its total expenditure. At times, West Germany was spending 30% of its total expenditure on CAP subsidies. So therefore, a significant proportion of West Germany's economic growth was being siphoned off to contribute to this particular fund. Why was that allowed to happen? Well, it was mainly due to the political lobbying of the West German agricultural sector, who were very influential, who supported CAP. So wealthy German farmers, goes back in history, had always had a sort of like an influence at the high level of politics, applying that pressure through political lobbying for this to happen because it benefited them. Why did it benefit them? For the reasons we just said. It guaranteed their food prices. The whole purpose of CAP was to protect farmers, and one of the means of protection was having a common food price across the whole of the European economy. So they had guarantees, no matter how inefficient they were, for their food prices. Now, normally, food prices will go up and down according to demand, but because they were guaranteed across Europe, effectively, they had these guarantees. So, what did that mean? the result was, and this didn't happen just in West Germany, but it certainly was an issue in West Germany, because they had guaranteed food prices, farmers overproduced in order to create large surpluses that the EEC had promised to buy. And the result of that, these large surpluses bought up by the EEC, produced by farmers who were basically overproducing because they had a guaranteed customer in the EEC, resulted in vast quantities of food. They talked about olive oil lakes, mountains of grain, which the EEC often simply had no choice but to destroy. Over to the right there's a cartoon from The Economist in 2012, which is poking fun at this particular scenario. So what did that mean? It basically, in the end, meant because food prices were guaranteed, farmers could avoid making improvements. There was no incentive, really, for them to invest any savings in improving efficiencies, because, of course, competition had been taken away. They had a guaranteed customer. So farmers could avoid making improvements to inefficient systems due to the lack of competition. And that basically meant that they had guaranteed high food prices, because with inefficiency, what that basically did, lack of competition, is it caused food prices to go up. And so overall, because of this inefficiency, which was a European issue arising from CAP, about food prices in Europe were about two to 5 times higher than world prices, than food in other parts of the world by the 1970s. So that was a definite disadvantage of CAP. By 1989, CAP consumed 50% of the entire EEC budget, and 2/3 of the net value of West Germany's agricultural sector came from CAP subsidies. So again, very good if you were a West German farmer. The fund that the EEC had to subsidise agriculture across its member states, there was a return to the German agricultural sector, but what it did is it made German agriculture inefficient. So if you were a West German farmer, you saw the standard of living increase for you, in spite of the fact that the West German agricultural sector only made a very small contribution to the West German gross domestic product. So that's CAP. The final slide is a conclusion to the whole of this topic, agriculture, 1933 to 1990. So, key points. Government policies were unable to halt the long-term agricultural decline. So remember, in the Brett study, a key area that's often asked is about government intervention. Okay. Another key area was long-term agricultural decline. So the two kind of come together there. Government policies were ineffective in halting long-term agricultural decline. So again, useful statistics in this period from 1950, in other words, just about the beginning of when West Germany was created, until 1970, West Germany's agricultural labour force decreased by 1.6 million. That is in contrast to other employment, non-agriculture, which increased by 9 million in the same period. So, again, remember there were population movements as well because of expellees and refugees coming into West Germany from abroad during this period. So the overall, therefore, shift continues to be a big shift away from agriculture towards industry. That process was further accelerated by a change in the nature of German industry. Previously, German industry was more primary, in other words, raw materials and manufacturing industry, which was on the whole based more in the north and the west of West Germany, particularly in the Ruhr area. But what we saw in this period was a process towards more of service industry, what we call the tertiary sector, such as banking, finance, insurance, etc. But again, in terms of agriculture, what you have therefore is urbanisation, the growth of towns and cities, and therefore you have movement from the land. There's that word continuity, which is an important thing when you're writing about this in the exam. All of these features were happening 100 years before. Okay, so it has been an ongoing, steady feature. And you can really sort of see it. By 1989, the end of our period that we're studying, German agriculture only contributed 1.6% of West Germany's GDP, her gross domestic product. In other words, the total wealth, the total value of wealth generated by her economy. Agriculture only contributed a tiny amount. And that was a decline from 11% in 1956. And of course, that's a significant date because 1956 was the year before the creation of the EEC. So, hence, the impact of CAP was certainly a factor there. So, overall, key features: lack of competition, high food prices were the sort of key features as we move to the 1970s and 1980s. Okay, and that completes this particular lesson. Hopefully that was useful to you. Thank you.